Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I'm so happy to be here with you again today to continue our discussion of Dancing the Dream. I have to say, I'm not tired of doing that intro yet. I wonder if season 2 I'll totally mix it up, but right now I'm not at all tired of it. I love it. This week, we have another piece that I'm really looking forward to discussing. It's another poem, and I think it falls in line with a lot of what we've talked about throughout the book, so I'm looking forward to that. But before I get into that, I just wanted to share something. So yesterday, I came across this quote by Thomas Merton. Now, Thomas Merton is an American monk. He's a theologian. He is someone who obviously writes and speaks about life and religion and philosophy and things like that. Anyway, I came across this quote that really reminded me of discussion last week about Once We Were There. Now, in Once We Were There, I talked about how it was kind of like, in some ways, a continuation of the shorter piece the week before, Breaking Free. And the way I saw the connection there was that there seemed to be this desire in both poems to escape the systems of humanity. And in last week's episode specifically, in discussing that piece, Once We Were There, I talked about that a little bit, about the noise of being human in our cultures and our societies and all the pressures that are put on us. And maybe that is what Michael was talking about here, right? With wanting to break free of that, wanting to return to something more pure, wanting to tap into his purpose. And I came across this quote by Thomas Merton that really spoke to exactly that point. So I thought I would share that with you as just a very brief follow-up to last week. So it says, "I have come to think that care of the soul requires a high degree of resistance to the culture around us, simply because that culture is dedicated to values that have no concern for the soul." And I really liked that because a large way that I had read Michael's piece was a kind of advocacy to show up for yourself, to break away for your own well-being, and to recognize that you are responsible for that. I mean, he ends with, "Join him now if you dare." And so there's that invitation. You know, it's interesting to me as this piece, I screenshot this quote when I found it because I just really liked it. And I think that it really does discuss a lot of the points Michael's getting to here. And I think you could argue that there's a lot of truth in this. I mean, the culture around us, the many cultures around us, but we've become a little bit of a monoculture because of the internet, but there's still, obviously individual cultures globally. And each one of them has different values. So, I mean, just to be clear, Thomas Merton, again, he's American. He was speaking to an American value system. And obviously Michael was American too. And I think there goes without saying there are other cultures in this world outside of American culture that seem to be more grounded in personal fulfillment in terms of a spiritual fulfillment, not just like a financial or, economic fulfillment or something. So either way, I just wanted to share that because it resonated with me. I love when I see things in the world that remind me of either Michael's work or my own interpretation of Michael's work. Because to some degree, I don't know there's a big difference between the work itself and our own interpretation, because on an individual level, the thing that sticks with us is how we feel about something. I mean, how many times had I heard Michael Jackson songs in my life? And for some reason, it took years later for it to really resonate with me, Either way, I just wanted to share that with you, if that would be of interest. So with that said, I am otherwise going to jump right into our episode. Now, we are discussing a piece which, like I said, feels very relevant to the overall messages of this book. So I'm looking forward to getting into this and discussing it with you. So now's the time that I invite you to relax, get comfortable, get cozy, and join me for this reading of Heaven is Here. Heaven is here. You and I were never separate. It's just an illusion, wrought by the magical lens of perception. There is only one wholeness, only one mind. We are like ripples in the vast ocean of consciousness. Come, let us dance, the dance of creation. Let us celebrate the joy of life. The birds, the bees, the infinite galaxies, rivers, mountains, clouds, and valleys are all a pulsating pattern, living, breathing, alive with cosmic energy. Full of life, of joy, this universe of mine. Don't be afraid to know who you are. You are much more than you ever imagined. You are the sun. You are the moon. You are the wild flower in bloom. You are the life throb that pulsates, dances from a speck of dust to the most distant star. And you and I were never separate. It's just an illusion wrought by the magical lens of perception. Let us celebrate the joy of life. Let us dance the dance of creation. Curving back within ourselves, we create again and again. Endless cycles come and go. We rejoice in the infinitude of time. There never was a time when I was not or you were not. There never will be a time when we will cease to be. Infinite, unbounded. In the ocean of consciousness, we are like ripples in the sea of bliss. You and I were never separate. It's just an illusion, wrought by the magical lens of perception. Heaven is here. Right now is the moment of eternity. Don't fool yourselves. Reclaim your bliss. Once you were lost, but now you're home. In a non-local universe, there is nowhere to go. From here to here is the unbounded ocean of consciousness. We are like ripples in the sea of bliss. Come, let us dance, the dance of celebration. Let us celebrate the joy of life. And you and I were never separate. It's just an illusion, wrought by the magical lens of perception. Heaven is here, right now, this moment of eternity. Don't fool yourself. Reclaim your bliss. Okay, well, I think I maybe need to stop suggesting that every poem Michael writes with a lot of repetition could have been a song. It could have been a song, right? But I don't want to focus on that. I've mentioned that for other pieces. I don't want to focus on that for this one. As I read this piece, it's the fourth piece from the end of the book, I think about what final messages Michael is trying to leave us with after the full length of the book itself and all of the themes that were explored in it. And I feel like when I read this piece, there's a cumulative quality to it for me, where this is something he has certainly touched upon throughout the book. This whole idea of heaven is already here. We are a part of a oneness. I mean, I feel like I've talked about this multiple times in the last few weeks, actually. So I want to try not to be too repetitive today in my discussion of the piece itself and some of the themes that emerge, but it's sort of impossible not to note that there is this very obvious theme. And as I was reading this piece in particular, it really felt to me like, I'm reading this sort of spiritual text. And by that, I mean, not just that Michael was writing about themes of spirituality, but that he was maybe writing this entire book for this specific purpose of sharing a kind of wisdom he had acquired by this point in his life. So wanting to share something beyond what he shares in his music, beyond what would be considered autobiographical. Though he talked about this book being a very autobiographical work for him, and perhaps it truly felt that way for him, this is a book that does not on the surface cover that much about Michael's life. It's mostly about his philosophies, his belief systems. And so I think we could say that his record of this book perhaps was not so much to tell his story, but to try to share the philosophies that were driving his life, so that in the future something we know we've talked about before, and also, most fans feel this way, I think. Unfortunately, in Michael's life, most interviewers did not ask him very much along the lines of his driving philosophies or his perspectives on why he created how he did, why he viewed the world how he did, why he operated as he did. He was really just had to be on the defense so often in his interviews, asking about cosmetic things and asking about scandals and whatnot. There was not a huge opportunity for Michael to be heard when it came to striking forward with this philosophy to imbue upon the world, And I think that when I read this, and I felt this way, I suppose, throughout the reading of this book, but when I read this piece particularly, something about it just feels to me like he was trying to create a record of who he really was, and what, on a deeper level, not just, what happened in his childhood or whatever, but like on a deeper spiritual level, he was trying to leave behind a record of some kind and offer it as a sort of tool or guiding interest for anyone approaching his work who was a fan, maybe, who wanted to learn more about him. There would be this record that showed, okay, these aren't just the moments of my life cataloged, but these are the driving forces behind those moments. And this was who I was, and this is who I grew up to be, beyond anything we would have known without reading the book. To get into this piece specifically, because of the repetition as well as the length, but mostly the repetition, honestly, I'm not going to go through the entire rereading of this as I do sometimes, but I do obviously want to touch upon the main points and sections. So the first verse is actually one of the parts that is repeated throughout. You might even think of it like a chorus. So it says, "You and I were never separate. It's just an illusion, wrought by the magical lens of perception." Now that part he repeats multiple times throughout this piece, maybe 4 times. I didn't count, I'm just guessing. I should probably count. Well, I was right. I counted and there are 4. One on each page for this piece. So I was correct. But needless to say, when he says you and I, my first thought was, who are the you and the I? I mean, I'm assuming he's writing from his own perspective, so he would be the I. When he says you, I think that could be a general you, like to anyone reading it. It could also be, any one of us. It could be to his fans specifically, but I also think it could be Michael talking to the whole oneness itself, or to God or the universe, or however he conceptualized that idea of a higher power. I mean, I do primarily think this is written to us as an invitation to us to understand him, to understand this philosophy that he has. But I think it could go both ways, just given the context of the book and the way the piece progresses. But it doesn't really matter, because if in the context of this, if you are buying into or adopting the philosophy that he describes and lays out here, even if just for the sake of understanding the piece, differentiating the you and the I certainly doesn't matter if they're not actually separate to begin with, right? So, it's still something that struck me as a thought. Mostly because I see a lot of the pieces in this book as very invitational to the reader, whoever the reader is, to adopt this way of thinking, to change their perspective, to reap the benefits, so to speak, of this sort of life approach. There's only one wholeness, only one mind. We are like ripples in the vast ocean of consciousness. This is the second week in a row, I think, where Michael has referenced the ocean as a metaphor. And it's just interesting to me than anything else, because the ocean works as a beautiful metaphor in a way, not just because of the vastness of it, but in the fact that like all these bodies of water throughout the world, the rivers, the streams, the tributaries, all of them flow into this one vast space. And I think the ocean for humans, for the vast majority of humans, I would say probably represents a kind of eternal mystery. I mean, I think for a lot of people, the ocean is almost as scary as the thought of the solar system. You know, it feels that foreign. So it works really well as a metaphor here. I really like, though, when a person uses a metaphor in a number of ways. So obviously, again, the vastness of the ocean, the way everything flows into and out of the ocean, these are all ways in which it's a good metaphor. But the line, we are all like ripples in the vast ocean of consciousness, the ripples, I think, is great. I mean, it speaks to the actual physicality of water. And ripples are such a good metaphor because you would never think to separate ripples from the water itself, right? Like the ripples are the movement. The ripples are demonstrating the water's response to external factors, but they aren't on their own these like individual things, you know? You might think of a river or a stream or something as its own individual entity, which is sort of fair in a way, despite the fact that it is ultimately leading back to the ocean. But you don't think of ripples that way, right? So I just think the choice to say ripples is interesting, because if you're listening to this or reading this and you're trying to think about what it means to really be a wholeness, or for there to really be only one mind, it's a good metaphor for that. And that's the best way to use metaphor, where it breaks down something that's really difficult to process and it puts it into perspective. And I like that. Come, let us dance the dance of creation. Let us celebrate the joy of life. Obviously, Michael references dance a lot as this kind of reference point for absolute freedom. And I think about that sometimes because I don't dance. I don't dance. I watch Michael dance, and I watch, I guess, other people dance, but he's the only one I pay attention to. But I watch him dance, and I love watching him dance, and I love the feeling I get from watching him dance. That was one of the most remarkable things, actually, for me about becoming a fan, was I never really thought about dance before or really cared that much. I mean, I thought it was entertaining, but it didn't affect me in any kind of other way. And still watching him the very first time, seeing his movements and the kind of story he told in his body when he danced, it was really like, I still to this day am shocked by how affected I am by it. And I just think about him having this driving philosophy in which he is constantly referencing dance as part of creation and dance as part of expression relating to this higher level stuff. It just kind of shows how when a person's art is fueled by this sort of energy, of this sort of transference of spirituality and like a relationship with the universe or whatever, it really feels like it transcends something, doesn't it? I feel the same way about Michael's voice. I mean, he has an objectively beautiful voice, but I always felt there was this other element to it that makes me feel a deeper connection to something bigger. It's something I can't explain, that I've really not felt with very many artists. So it's something quite remarkable to him. Anyway, I just really like that it makes me think about these things, because again, I don't relate to dancing as a form of my own expression. But as someone who feels that way, dancing in a lot of ways to me does represent a kind of ultimate freedom, because the reason I don't dance is I'm embarrassed. You know what I mean? Like, I don't dance because it's embarrassing to do it in front of literally anyone. And what kills me is, as a person who teaches writing, like, people are embarrassed to write and to share their writing. And I'm like, no, don't be. But of course, to me, writing is my art and it is my thing. And so to me, of course, I understand the vulnerability of it, but I also am like, no, it's for everyone. Not just the people who have studied it and worked at it. It's for everyone. And so it's kind of funny to see a sort of mirrored thing. Now, again, I'm overthinking just this as an expression, but I'm interested in it because it's the way that he saw the world. And obviously dance was integral for him to his life. So the way he saw the world as this dance of creation, it's just kind of, it's endearing to understand him a little bit more. The birds, the bees, the infinite galaxies, rivers, mountains, clouds, and valleys are all a pulsating pattern, living, breathing, alive with cosmic energy. It reminds me of one of the pieces a few weeks ago where I think he talked about nature's music or something. I can't remember which piece it was right now, but the thing that strikes me about this part isn't the main idea of it all, because honestly, it's all part of this vast universe. I think his point being every single thing around us is an equal part of it. But what strikes me as most interesting are all a pulsating pattern. The word pattern, I guess, I just wonder about, because of course you think of a pattern as something that's very planned and guided. I guess that's what he's implying there is all part of a pulsating pattern. Not that there is some kind of design involved in that. Now, obviously, that's a pretty common perspective in terms of believing in a higher power or something. But the word pattern just makes me second guess it a little bit, if that's the full intent of what he meant. Because when I think of pattern, I think of a kind of guide that you're following, not just like a design, Like if he said it's all a part of a pulsating design, I would think, oh, okay. But a pulsating pattern makes me think almost like I'm imagining like a circuit board where there's this electrical flow that goes in a specific order, that runs in a certain way in order to ignite everything, empower everything. I say this as someone who knows nothing about electricity or how anything is powered in this entire world. So bear with me if that's not a good explanation, but that's what I thought of. And so maybe that's what he means by pattern, like where there's a system where everything cycles through and repeats, because like I just said before about the rivers, like the rivers flow into the oceans and it's all a part of this system that is constantly cycling and flowing. The food chain is even a part of that system, So maybe that's kind of what he means. I'll be honest, sometimes I make myself laugh when I do this because I think, is anyone else interested in me talking about a single word choice this much? But hey, if you're still listening after all this time, then I guess you are. So you can put up with it, I suppose. So this next part I actually want to break down a little bit, only because as a person who writes poetry too, line breaks and stanza breaks are really important in terms of the message you're trying to tell. So I find this really interesting. Now, when you're just listening, you wouldn't know how this is laid out necessarily. But in the poem itself, in a 3-line stanza, he says, "Full of life, of joy, this universe of mine, don't be afraid." So that way it's written makes it sound like he's telling the universe to not be afraid, right? But then there's this line break, and then it starts the next stanza. "To know who you are much more than you ever imagined." So the "don't be afraid" from the previous stanza actually flows directly into this next part. Don't be afraid to know who you are. So there's a couple ways you can read it, but the line break is intentional. It always is. So I'm curious about that part. Like, why format it in such a way where the "don't be afraid" part could speak both to the universe, but also to the people reading? I guess on one hand, it could be because this whole concept is that there's a one wholeness. So when you're speaking to the universe, you're also speaking to everyone else, right? So maybe part of the format is to demonstrate the main idea to begin with. I'm not sure if I'm satisfied by that answer though. I don't know. I like what he says still either way. Don't be afraid to know who you are. You are much more than you ever imagined. I don't know. This just made me think about a lot of things. Like, I think there's something kind of special about the thought that it seems like almost all human beings, at some point in their life at least, if not in an ongoing way, feel like they're not enough. They feel like they're not giving enough, that they're not smart enough, that they're not attractive enough, that they're not whatever. On a base level, when you strip it all away, that they're just not enough, period. And I love that he's reminding people like you're more than you have any idea that you are. But it also makes me wonder if part of that universal, or that almost universal feeling that people have in which they feel that they are not enough is just part of the makeup of being human. Because if you are following the philosophy he's laid out here, okay, there's this perception we're blinded by that we're all separate, that there is no oneness. Then if there's this perception when you're human that you're on your own, that you're just one little speck separate of everybody else, then all the pressure is on you, just you, to deliver everything that you do and to do everything. And you compare yourself to other people and want to give more and be more. But if you think about it, if we didn't all have that perception of separateness, and we all felt and believed that we were part of each other, that we were part of the whole vastness of the world, that it was all ripples in a single ocean, then maybe you wouldn't feel that lack in the same way. We're saying all of this, of course, ignoring like psychology and sociology and all the different things that on a human level influence us to feel like we're not enough. That is all valid. And I'm not saying that is not. More just in terms of this spiritual connection he's making here. I just think it's an interesting concept to think about, and how it may be very healing on a human level to believe in this wholeness, this one-mindedness of all things on earth. That if we're a part of something grand, when you don't like yourself, or you are unimpressed with yourself, or you feel like you're not enough, you're either A, forgetting that you're a part of all these other things and therefore you are all of these things, or B, you're saying that the whole universe is not enough, which most people wouldn't say, So it's just I like when these pieces make me think about stuff to this degree, stuff I don't always get to think about, But he continues here. You are the sun, you are the moon, you are the wildflower in bloom, you are the life throb that pulsates, dances from a speck of dust to the most distant star. And there's something so beautiful about it, to tell someone who is hurting, for example, someone who feels like they aren't enough, look around. All of that is you too. All of that is me too. All of that is us. So you have nothing to be ashamed of. You have nothing to feel bad about, because you're a part of this incredible thing. And isn't it incredible to be aware of that? It's such a gift to give someone. Well, again, it's almost a kind of freedom to say all those pressures that you put on yourself as a human being, all those ways in which you feel like you're not living up to what you ought to be. All of that, let it go, because you are enough, because look at all around you and you're all a part of this. You're a part of this and I'm a part of this and we're shared. And again, it reminds me of another part of me, which is one of my favorite Michael Jackson songs. And it's because this philosophy he's describing in this piece and in that song are philosophies I adopted for myself many years ago at this point. So he's speaking, he's speaking to the right person, because I already buy into all of it. I guess it's just kind of remarkable to think about so far back into Michael's career in life. Like when you think about it, 1987, when Another Part of Me came out, for example, years before this book came out, 5 years before it came out, he wrote that in the mid 80s, like 1985, maybe 1986. And who knows how long he felt that way and viewed the life that way. So the majority of his life, presumably, he held that philosophy and it guided him. And sometimes I wonder, with having a career that was so driven by his image and in a way his ego, and I don't mean that in a bad way, to be clear. I mean that more on a human ego level. The ego of Michael Jackson was part of what was being sold and part of what was being bought into by the masses and everything. When you're thinking about that, I wonder if these types of readings and writings and topics and things were necessary for him to ground himself a bit. I mean, Michael never to me came across as a person who was arrogant or lacked humility at all. In fact, he always came across as very humble to me. But I also see that as being something that took a lot of practice and actual effort to sustain, because I think it would be very difficult to have Michael's career and not let it kind of get ahead of you sometimes in terms of your self-perception. So I just wonder sort of what role this kind of philosophy played in his own life. I mean, when I was thinking earlier about how being able to tell someone, hey, you are enough because you're a part of this grander picture is comforting. It did also make me wonder about Michael and if that comforted him when he felt he wasn't enough. Or was it the kind of thing that you know and believe, but when it applies to you, it's just too hard. It's just too hard to get there and let it penetrate, you know? I'm so curious about how he experienced things, especially when I read these pieces and there's so much insight in them. We can make a lot of assumptions, but, you know, there's a lot I believe in that I'm not very good at living by. By that I mean those things that I know are right and true for myself, but I just hold myself to a different standard. And I imagine that was a big issue for Michael too. He continues, he says, curving back within ourselves, we create again and again. Endless cycles come and go. We rejoice in the infinitude of time. This is another place where honestly the ocean metaphor is so good, because when I was reading this again, just now, I was thinking about how like the waves crash and return back to the same ocean. And that cycle reminds me of what he wrote, the endless cycles that come and go. I do find it interesting that he uses the phrase curving back within ourselves multiple times. He used it once in this piece, but in one of our previous, very recent pieces, he used it also. And actually, when I think about that even, it reminds me of the ocean. When you're on a shoreline and you're looking ahead and you're seeing the waves crashing, you know, far away from the shoreline, far out there, you're seeing it crash. And it's kind of curving in and curling in on itself. So that metaphor lands, doesn't it? But then he goes on to what is one of my favorite parts of the whole piece. There never was a time when I was not or you were not. There never will be a time when we will cease to be. That's such a beautiful perspective, and I think one that would bring so many people comfort. Now, I know that there are obviously different life philosophies and different religions that people can follow that give some explanation of the afterlife, or, you know, what happens before and after our time on earth. But personally, I like this one a lot, and a lot more than I like the others. You know, I like this idea that all things always are and will always be. Like, I know that there are many religions that believe that death is not the end, but what happens after death, but it's different in so many different religions. And I just really like, personally for myself, I like this version of things where we return to a oneness, where we are all a part of something together. We can feel all of each other at the same time. And this time on earth is like these rippling waves, or this crashing ocean. You know, it just continues and it continues, but it all goes back to the same place. It's just a really comforting thought to me personally, that I think last week or a couple of the other weeks recently I said that it seems pretty clear Michael has this philosophy. And it's just funny, we came upon this piece where he very clearly lays out that is in fact how he felt and what he believed. Now, the majority of the piece that remains is some version of a repeated thought or phrase or something from the piece, so I'm not going to read through all of them. But I'll end here with this verse, which is where the title comes from. And he says, "Heaven is here. Right now is the moment of eternity. Don't fool yourself. Reclaim your bliss." Maybe this is actually my favorite part. Maybe this is actually it, because first of all, the heaven is here thing we've talked about many, many times on this podcast, because this is something Michael has hinted at and discussed in multiple pieces throughout the entire book. Heaven is here right now. We are in that moment. And that kind of thought gives me chills. It gives me so much excitement about life to think about this concept. But the part I think is really special here, and that is reminiscent of some of the other pieces recently, is don't fool yourself. Reclaim your bliss. Are you listening? No, that's a reference from a few weeks ago. Don't worry about it. No, there's this kind of funny nature to some of these pieces. You know, in the last piece, he asks, join him if you dare. He asks, are you listening, in the previous piece? Here he says, don't fool yourself, reclaim your bliss. And this is something that, again, about Michael, I've always loved. In so much of his work, whether that's in this book or that's in his music, I often refer to it as call to action. Sometimes I refer to it to it as invitational, but one way I think we can consistently think of it as is empowering. Because the message here is, hey, this is the way things actually are. You're going to miss it if you don't wake up. So stop fooling yourself and reclaim the bliss that is rightfully yours. That's the way it sounds to me. It sounds like this empowering call to action, this invitation to reclaim your bliss, to reclaim your own life. And perhaps it goes back to that quote I read at the beginning, to reclaim it from the culture that's not interested in us feeling that sense of connection, that there's no way to profit off of us actually feeling it. There's a lot more ways to profit off of us wanting to feel it or not being able to feel it, but actually feeling it, it's very difficult to profit from that. Either way, I love this concept that heaven is here or that heaven is on earth. I very recently heard this quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, who, if you're not familiar with him, he was this Buddhist monk, this Zen master. He's written so much and done so much work about all aspects of being alive and in life. And I've, though, been very interested in his work on mindfulness and whatnot. But he has this quote, I cannot remember it exactly, so bear with me. But he has this quote about, if you want to enter heaven on earth, just stop and breathe in and out, or something along those lines. And I love it. I think it's grounding. I think it's beautiful. And it reminds me of everything we've read here and have discussed here. So with that said, I just love how these pieces are progressing toward the end here. It's not that they're new ideas that we haven't heard yet in the book, but I think they're being presented in a slightly new way, with these calls and these reminders and these encouraging messages to us. Don't fool yourself, reclaim your bliss. I just love that, and I appreciate that from Michael. I mean, I get this feeling like he wrote this with complete sincerity, but also with knowing that his imagery and his, he would stick around in the public eye for a very long time. And that I think maybe he wanted to cement some of his own beliefs into that narrative about him. And I hope that as people continue to learn more about him and the truth about Michael and who he was, I hope more people revisit this book and get to see that more clearly, because it's very important. And I think he clearly saw it as very important too. So with that said, I want to thank you all so much for your time, your attention, for joining me today. I look forward to meeting with you all again very soon next week. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week and weekend. And we will talk very soon. Take care.